Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome to my channel. So today I want to talk about how I study in medical school and the things that worked for me during my first year, because I know that when I was going into medical school, I had no idea how to study. I was so worried about figuring out how to study, and there definitely is a lot to learn, but as you go along, you get a better sense of what works for you, and you will end up doing great in the end. So if you like these tips, please like this video, comment, tell me what works for you or what you're planning to try out, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So the first thing that I think is important is to know yourself. So how did you study in college? How did you study for the MCAT? What are the techniques that worked for you in the past that you can use and possibly adapt to work for you in medical school? Now, when I was starting out medical school, I remember that I had a specific way that I loved to study in college, and a lot of people told me that that was not going to work in medical school. Like, I had to completely change up what I was doing, and to be honest, that wasn't entirely true. I still use that method of studying, and I'm going to get into that further in the video, but my point here is that you need to adapt the ways that you study best to medical school, okay? It's not like you have to completely get rid of everything you know and do something that doesn't feel like it works for you. You need to make sure that you are staying true to yourself with how you study, and that the things that you're doing, are not just what everybody else is doing, but they're things that are actually helping you learn. On that same note, I think it's also really important to try different things out, get a feel for what works for you. There might be something that you think would never work for you, and then you try it and it really works. When I was starting medical school, everybody was telling me to try Anki, and to be honest, I was like really skeptical of it. And for a lot of people, Anki just doesn't work, and they'll think, oh, well, this works for everybody. Why is this not working for me? At the same time, though, I have found that it has worked for me in certain classes in certain ways. So, at the same time, it is popular for a reason. So you just gotta try different things out, and don't be afraid. I know that when I was starting, I was like, how do I try different study methods out if the material is moving so quickly? The courses are so fast. I have no idea how I'm gonna be able to learn this much information, and I'm being told to try different study techniques out. Like, how does that work? But honestly, just don't be afraid to try different things, because if you try something and it doesn't work, you can just scrap that and move on, and then maybe you'll actually try something that works out really well for you. So go into it with an open mind, but also know what works for you the best. So the first thing that I do is I watch the lecture that's being given. A big thing that was a surprise for me is that, at least at my school, I don't know if this is every school, but I really never use textbooks in medical school. I'm just not a textbook person. I know a lot of people that love textbooks, and they will use the textbook that is recommended by the professor, that is like the required reading, or even if they're just finding a book on their own, a book that works for a lot of people that they know, they're very into that, and that's how they learn. For me, there usually is required reading at our medical school, and I honestly have never done it. The textbooks are never just like independently tested, at least at my school, in a way that it wouldn't be material that you didn't cover in class already. So it's always like related to something that we learned in class, right? But I have just always been more of a lecture person. I don't really like textbooks so much, so I focus on lecture. I really like having things explained to me. And the big question that a lot of people ask is, do you go to lecture live, or do you go to the recorded, or do you watch the recorded lecture later? So I am somebody that I am very, all over the place with this, honestly. It really, really depends on the class for me. If there's a class that moves very, very slowly, I most of the time will not be able to pay attention if I watch the lecture live. And so I'll just watch it later. I'll just watch the recording, because I know that if I try to watch it live, yes, maybe I'll be watching it when it's real time, but I will probably end up getting distracted in some way. And that was a big problem for me, especially because we didn't have in-person lectures at all this year because of COVID. And I know that different schools are doing different things. I'm not really sure what's gonna happen this year, but My point with this is just that you have to know, are you going to get distracted? Are you going to be able to focus? You know, when I could focus, if something was very interactive and fast paced, I actually really liked watching the lecture live because I knew that I was watching it then and there. I wasn't going to procrastinate watching it later, get behind on a few lectures or something like that. I could just watch it when it was playing and I didn't have to worry about it later. I know some people that didn't even go to lecture for certain classes, like anatomy. Anatomy is a class where you're basically just memorizing a bunch of different things, and lecture is not always the most helpful. However, for me, I found that it was really useful to watch the recordings of the anatomy lectures at double speed, so I could go through them quickly. If it wasn't really helpful at all, then maybe I wouldn't pay as much attention, I wouldn't really take notes, I would just know what was something that like I needed to know. However, I just thought it was helpful in general to go to lecture throughout the whole year because I just like knowing what the professor is emphasizing. I just like, you know, seeing what's important and having things explained. Even if the professor is not good at teaching, then obviously that's less helpful, but I at least did find that that was something that worked for me. I think that if you are starting out at medical school and you don't know if you should go live or if you should watch recordings, I would just start by watching it live and then seeing what works for you. I think that's a really good way to go about it. And if you're finding that you're not using your time efficiently, if you're doing one or the other, then you can switch it up, try different things, and you can always go back to lecture in person or watch recordings later. You know, it's not like you have to stick to something for the entire year. And then after I take my notes, I'll go back and review them later. And my main thing that I like to do is writing things down, which is something that I still continue to do from college. That was something that when I went to medical school, people told me wasn't gonna work anymore. But what I realized was that if I was writing every single word down, then it totally wasn't gonna work. And that was what I did in college. I would write like everything down, and pretty much just everything from my notes or from the slides or like whatever I needed to know, I was writing it down. In medical school, I only write the really important things down or things that I can't remember if I've just studied by reading them, if I've studied through Anki or whatever it is. If I need help remembering that, or I just wanna get like a big point into my head, I always write things down. I have like a million notebooks, and it's not even that I review the information later. I honestly don't. I don't look at anything later, but it's just the act of putting pen to paper that really helped me remember things for some reason. So that's been a huge thing that works for me. Okay, so the next thing that I do is I use Anki. Now, if you have never used Anki before, then I would try to find a YouTube video or maybe somebody you know that can teach you how to use it, or something that can just give you a better idea of how it works. Because when I was going into medical school, everybody talked about Anki. I had no idea what Anki was. There is a really steep learning curve with Anki, but once you get over that hill, and you're able to understand it a little bit better, it's actually not that bad, and you'll be able to go through cards pretty quickly once you get the hang of it. I actually found that Anki was the best for anatomy. That was like the most useful time that I used Anki pretty much throughout the whole year, because anatomy is pure memorization. It's not understanding concepts. It's not like you need to be able to understand like a system and how it works or anything like super complicated like that. It's just like a million different things that you need to know, and that's why Anki can be so helpful. A lot of people find that making their own cards works for them. Personally, I didn't really like doing this. I just found like it was a big waste of time. But if you go to a collaborative school where people share a lot of their materials that they create or that they've used, or I'm sure online you could just find something that works in order to just like use somebody else's Anki deck for that class. Like anatomy, that was what I did. I used a pre-made deck that helped so much, and then you can also like add in certain cards or make your own. But I found that just having like an Anki deck that was specific for anatomy, that I didn't have to make like every single card for, worked so well for me. And pretty much what I would do with that is I would wake up every single day at like 7 or 7:30 or whenever you get up. Like the first thing that I would do in the morning is I would go through my Anki due cards. And your due cards are the ones that you're supposed to do that day, and you should get them done so that they don't start piling up. I don't really want to get into this because I really feel like I can't even explain it so well, and I think that somebody else might be able to explain it way better. But if you are consistently using Anki, it really does work. Like I found that I was remembering a ton of stuff from anatomy when it came down to the final. I still knew stuff already because I had seen those terms so many times. However, for more like systems-based classes or classes like histology, immunology, things like that, I found it more helpful to mostly go based off my notes and reading, rewriting stuff, looking at other people's notes. And instead of going through an entire Anki deck that goes through everything that has to do with that system, I preferred to just make cards for things that I didn't understand. That worked really well for me, and I probably am going to do more of that this year because I find that if I'm doing Anki cards for like every single term for systems, it doesn't really make sense to me as much because they're more about understanding rather than just rote memorization like anatomy is. For me, that's how it works, but I know a lot of people use Anki in like very different ways, and a lot of people really find it useful to make an entire deck with every single card on everything, and that helps them learn, just making it themselves. So it just really depends on you and how you study. Okay, so the third thing that I did, this was more specifically to do with anatomy, but for anatomy, I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I specifically watched a lot of videos from The Noted Anatomist. That YouTube channel was amazing. I learned a lot from that, and it helped me understand certain concepts when I felt like the lectures were really not helpful. But you can find videos on like every single topic, and that doesn't just have to be an anatomy thing. I just found it really helpful for anatomy in particular. But I would highly recommend, if you're not understanding something, to just watch a YouTube video on it, and I'm sure there's like a million other ways that it could be explained so much better. So that was definitely very helpful. Another thing that I love to do, depending on the class of course and who taught that lecture, is I love to rewatch lectures. Now, I have found that sometimes this makes like such a world of difference if I'm not understanding something, or if something's not like clicking for some reason, or I just need a little extra time digesting the material in order to understand it. I love rewatching lectures, and I'm so surprised that this works so well for me. But for some reason, when I rewatch a lecture, it just really helps. Again, I don't do this for every single class. I definitely don't do this for every lecture, but I do it for the ones where I feel like it is going to benefit me a lot. And I would say that that is something that genuinely has helped a ton. The next thing is peer tutoring. Now, I think a lot of schools, I'm not sure if every school offers this, if this is like a very common thing, but I know that when I was going on interviews, a lot of schools said that they had this, so I know it's not just my school. The tutors, they're usually like second years most of the time, maybe third years. Third years are a little busy, but maybe like fourth years as well. They will get paid by the school to tutor students for free. At least at my school, it's free for the students, but the tutors get paid, and that helps so much because these tutors know so much. And some of them, I'm like, how do you understand all of this? Like, you just took this class last year, but they're honestly so helpful, and they also just like can help you a lot with advice for how to study for the class. Another thing that I really like doing specifically again for anatomy, because we had our anatomy groups, is meeting up with a study group, occasionally going through some concepts, explaining things to each other, talking about it. That's something that could work really well. I do this occasionally because I think it's really important to make sure you understand the material before you're studying all the time with other people. But I did find this helpful, especially when you understand like a good chunk of it, and then maybe there's certain things you don't totally understand. you can meet up with your friends and they can explain certain things to you. So that was great as well. All right, that's pretty much all I have to say. Again, this is just what I did, but there's like a million different ways to study in med school. So don't be afraid to watch other videos, Google, ask people what they did. I found that super, super helpful. I would ask like everybody I knew how they studied. So just look around, figure out what works for you, and I do really hope that you guys found this helpful. If you did, again, like and comment and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye, guys.